So welcome to the Adventures in Credentials session. Each of our presenters is going to be discussing and walking through design and support for credentialing and the ways that that can help support geospatial education and learning. And the first presenter that we have is Nicole. And Nicole is with the Geospatial Science and Technology Education Center. And Nicole also is a professor at, sorry, and now I'm missing your bio here, Nicole. Let me grab it.
At HAC, Central Pennsylvania's Community College.
Perfect, over at Harrisburg. And she's also an associate director of the Geotech Center. So she organizes and facilitates face-to-face and professional development opportunities for secondary, 2-year, and 4-year educators. So I think it's a fantastic presentation to start looking at what are those options for getting certifications in place. And so with that, I'll pass it over to you, Nicole.
Okay, thank you. And let me share my screen here. Can everyone see my screen?
It looks great.
Awesome, thank you. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the session. As Brian mentioned, my name is Nicole Ernst, and I am one of the Associate Directors for the Geotech Center. One of the Geotech Center projects has been to develop a Geospatial Technology Educator Certification Program. So we're going to talk about the first iteration of this program, and then where we are hoping to head with the program in the next round of funding that we received for this particular program. But before we launch into the details of the program, I want to talk a little bit about how this concept came to fruition. In the summer of about 2018, there were some discussions with the Esri education manager, K-12 education manager, and the GIS Certification Institute executive director, talking about how we can provide credentials to educators who are wishing to teach geospatial technology in their classrooms. Specifically, at this time, we were looking at how do we provide secondary, middle school and secondary educators credentials to teach. A lot of them wanted to teach a class on geospatial, but their administrators were asking them for some type of evidence that they can do so, but their degrees were in education or something unrelated to geospatial, so they didn't really have that documented background in geospatial. And that's the niche that we were trying to fill, was to help those educators get those credentials so that geospatial technology can be introduced at the middle school and high school level. To further vet this idea, we had a subject matter expert forum in Louisville, Kentucky in March of 2019. And some of our subject matter experts are here today. And we were asking them to provide us feedback on if this is something that's even needed. What is the need for this? What type of proof would educators need to provide their administration to document their expertise? What kinds of content do they need to know to teach geospatial technology in their classroom? And then what kinds of activities should be included in a certification pathway? And the end result of that forum was a draft pathway for geospatial technology educator certification. And with that pathway being drafted, the Geotech Center, applied for supplemental funding to support a pilot program of this so that we can further vet the idea. So in terms of the pathway that participants went through, it went from all the way from application to self-assessment to applying for certification. So I'll go through each one of these briefly so you can see what the certification program consisted of for our pilot group. And then we'll talk about some tweaks we're going to be making to some of these areas. But our intended audience at the time was really middle secondary and two-year educators. And you're going to see in a moment that we reached even beyond that intended audience. So the whole process for this started with an application, and we used their application materials to rank them based on what they submitted. In particular, we paid attention to their motivational statement and how they use geospatial technology in the classroom, because we were interested in certifying individuals who had experience. We want this was a way of them providing a credential saying that they could do it. So we were looking for people who this was not something that they had no experience in, but they had documented experience using geospatial technology in the classroom. In our pilot, we had 62 applications. We accepted 33 of those into our pilot program. That pilot program pathway then started with a personal self-assessment. And what this consisted of was a self-assessment that had each individual rank themselves on their perceived knowledge in 190 different geospatial technology competencies. This way, it helped them assess which their areas of strength and weakness. So as they were then moving through the pathway, they can focus themselves in their areas of weakness a little bit better and fill in any gaps that they had. We also aggregated the results for the whole for the entire cohort so that we could see their strengths and weaknesses. So again, that we could better tailor the content to who was sitting on the other end of things. We had the participants complete a pre-pilot self-assessment and a post so that they can kind of compare what they thought their progress was as they went through this certification pathway. After these are the results of the personal self-assessment, but these are the aggregated results for cohort 1. So collectively, they rank themselves weakest on competencies associated with remote sensing and competencies associated with GIS design aspects. So that was really useful for us to have as a team. So as we're developing content, we're focusing a little bit more on those areas where we're seeing that our participants have more weakness than in other areas. After the personal self-assessment, participants would then go through an 8-unit massively open online course called Exploring Our World Mapping in Geospatial Science. And this was a MOOC that was housed in Canvas, which included content, discussions, assignments, quizzes, and so on. And you can see that the different content areas listed over here, everything from what is geospatial technology, spatial analysis and modeling, remote sensing, drones, cartography, and so on. So each one of these units included a hands-on activity in addition to just having the content. But the beautiful thing I thought about this massively open online course was many of these instructors wanted to be teaching a geospatial technology class at their institution. All the content that was part of this MOOC was something that they could use as a starting point for teaching that content at their institution so that they're not starting from ground zero, or they can enhance what they already had. So it really, I think, worked out well for the participants in that way. And this is just a screenshot showing what a typical unit looked like in the course, where we went from objectives to lectures, video lectures, readings, cool videos, summary, there's discussions, video discussions, and so forth. So it was really quite robust what we were having participants do in that course. When concept modules were kind of the next piece of the pathway, but not only were they the next piece of the pathway, they were also embedded in the MOOC in some areas where we saw a good fit. But what a concept review module is it's a review of a concept, not meant to necessarily teach the concept from start to finish, but just to provide an overview, a refresher of what that concept is, why it's important, and provide examples of that particular concept. At the end of each one of these concepts, there was a quiz that they had to go through. And then finally, the pathway culminated with a capstone project. This was something that included an exercise, which they could use any GIS software for, and an instructor resource guide, which would provide background for the exercise and any kind of necessary information that an instructor would need to know to implement it, because these exercises were going to become part of a repository that others can pull the lessons from. All of these resources were then kind of housed in a story map, and the story map was meant to provide context for the exercise and then contain links for the exercise, the resource guide, and the data. Each of these capstone projects was reviewed by one of our team members. Participants got feedback. They had the opportunity, if they were not successful on the first time through, to revise it once for a resubmission. So in total, we had, as I mentioned, 33 selected, but only 31 participated. 22 successfully completed the pathway, and 9 did not. One thing to mention that is pretty important here is that we launched this in January of 2020. We all know what happened in March 2020, COVID hit, and that impacted every single one of our educators that was going through this program. So we intended for this to last to April. We extended it over the summer because teachers had to readjust for everything that was hitting them with COVID, and we didn't want to be something that was an additional stress to teachers. So we extended our deadline for deliverables. In terms of geographic distribution, you can see that we had people from all over the United States. We even had one Canadian, and we're hoping eventually to expand more to an international audience. In terms of demographics, most of the participants were from middle school, high school, with 18 from that institution type, and then 7 each for 2- and 4-year institutions. More male, heavily white, and the age group that had the most participants was 36 to 45. And one of our goals for the next round of funding is to reach out to different demographics so that we are reaching just a more diverse pool of applicants. And then throughout the whole time, we surveyed our participants at the end of each step in the pathway, and they provided us tons of wonderful, useful feedback that we could make it the content and the experience better for the next time. And with that feedback, we are now in developing the second iteration of this program, and we received funding to support 2 25-person cohorts. For the participants going through this, they will receive a $1,000 stipend, and it's open to secondary instructors, 2- and 4-year and faculty. And I'll pop the link for the application into the chat here in a moment. And this link contains information about the certification program, as well as an application for it. You can see the down here at the bottom. These are the important dates that are associated with all the deadlines. The deadline for the next round to apply is August 16th, and then we'll announce the results about a month after that. So with that, I am done, and my computer just locked up.
No
which
worries,
is
Ann.
great. Um, and so,
Over to
and
back.
I don't know if Ann or Tom, if you can put the link for the hub site in the chat, that would be appreciated.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. You had a question in there from somebody that came in revolving around the GIS design aspects, asking if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, that has to do with database modeling for the most part, the geodatabases and geospatial data models is the area that they were feeling some weakness in.
Okay, interesting. So just some of those kind of core concepts of designing or building out a database just to get started for, you know, what that design should look like.
Right.
Okay, great. Awesome, Nicole. Well, thank you so much. So next, I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, but for those that weren't here, Rodney wasn't able to make it, but Rodney sent over a video. So we're going to attempt to stream that through Zoom. So we'll see how this goes. So let me stop sharing, and then I'm going to set the sharing so that we'll play the video that Rodney sent along. And also, if anyone has any questions or anything else for Nicole or related to Rodney's presentation, please just drop those into the chat. And then briefly before I start sharing his presentation. So the presentation is a look at comparative views of geospatial competencies. And so Dr. Rodney Jackson is a senior researcher with the National Geospatial Center of Excellence, has 20 years of experience in geospatial higher education and research. And so this is a study that he put together to look at these competencies. So I will share my screen. And here we go.
Hello everyone, my name is Rodney Jackson and I'll be presenting on a study we conducted at the Geotech Center looking at geospatial competencies. And we'll be using the Q methodology study to assess the perceptions of respondents toward a set of competencies we developed within our competency matrix. The problem we've been experiencing is we don't have input from secondary or post-secondary educators regarding how they view geospatial competencies and the relevance of those competencies within industry. So the purpose of this is to gain their shared and individual viewpoints toward a defined set of competencies within a competency matrix, because knowing what geospatial educators view and also understanding what industry partners view as important within the geospatial workforce, we can make a better connection between those two entities. And so our methodology begins with selecting a concourse and subsequently a Q sample or Q set. And we developed a 190 statement concourse of geospatial competencies and boiled those down to 72 core competencies that we used for this analysis. As far as our P set or population set, we engaged 21 educators to complete a Q-sort activity, and this generated our data that we evaluated using a Q-sort technique where these statements were evaluated on a +6 to -6 evaluation as far as relevance. We used a quasi-normal distribution for our sorting grid, and we had a prescribed number of rows and columns, thereby making this a forced distribution. And so this is the sorting grid that we used. We have 72 competency statements within this sorting grid, and they are ranked from positive to -6. You also know that we have some levels, in this case, 5s, the 3s, and 2s, where we replicate those levels. This is to get the 72 competencies within a quasi-normal distribution. And so we begin with a factor reduction techniques. In this case, we use the centroid factor analysis technique. It's an accepted technique, and it worked well in this study. From that, we generated 3 factor solutions with the lowest eigenvalue for any factor at 1.07. 1 is the baseline for acceptable values for eigenvalues for a factor. And eigenvalues are calculated by the squared loadings of the Q-sorts that load onto each factor. In doing so, we explained 41% of the variance. We had 19 of the 21 participants who loaded onto a factor, and we had no less than 3 significant loadings at p less than 0.05 for any factor. We took those factors and then we rotated it using a Varimax rotation to get the best combination of relationships between sorts and the factors to explain the most variance possible. Varimax is a widely accepted technique, especially in exploratory analysis. And so this is what generated those 3 factors. We see the table here. We see the participants that loaded from 3 to 11, as well as eigenvalues that range from 1.07 to 5.98. Our variance, which exceeded the 40 baseline. Our composite reliability were all easily above the 0.8 baseline for composite reliability, and our standard error were well within acceptable values for standard error for Q methodology study for these factors. And so from these factors, we generated 3 themes that align with the factors. We have sources of data. So not only do we get the loads and the statements that align with those loads, but we also get a post-sort narrative data set where people share why they ranked their values in the manner they did. And so this generates 3 themes, in this case for the 3 factors, and also a title which captures the essence of the shared perspectives. In this case, factor 1 had digital imagery is not important to those loads. For factor 1, no appreciation for advanced spatial concepts for those Q sorts that loaded on factor 2, and using or defining data to solve problems for the participants who loaded onto factor 3. And so what we show here are the distinguishing statements for the highest and lowest ranking statements for those 3 factors. And distinguishing statements are important because those are the statements which distinguish one factor from another and help to make them identifiable and discernible. And so the highest and loading factors are also thought of as anchor statements because these statements tend to anchor the analysis for the narratives that we generate for each factor. Now what we see here is a composite Q sort for a factor. And so why I wanted you to see this is because, one, I wanted you to see the distinguishing statements for this specific factor that were significant at the 0.05 level, represented by the yellow statements, at the 0.01 level of significance, represented by the green statements, and also consensus statements. And consensus statements are statements that are ranked similarly across all the factors by the respondents. Hence, the respondents had a consensus about the relative value or the relevance of these competency statements. This study did have limitations. One, we targeted a very specific subset of the geospatial workforce, and so there's not a great deal of expansion we can do currently with this data set. We only developed 3 factors, which is not inherently a limitation, but typically you would like more than 3 factors if possible. Given the limited number of respondents, 21, that is to be expected. We would like to have been able to explore or explain more variance, but we did exceed the minimum requirement. And we use 72 core competencies from our competency assessment tool. And this tool was developed from a variety of sources at different levels of granularity for different purposes, so that could have affected their results. So to look at our findings, 1, we generated 3 specific factors which were distinct and distinguishable, noting 3 differing perspectives from these educators. Finding 2, across the board from all respondents, we noticed the competency areas that were the highest or seen as being most relevant. In this case, cartographic principles, spatial analysis, and solving problems. And 3 competency areas that were seen as less relevant and scored lower across the board. And these were the competency statements that related to mathematical operations, digital imagery, and programming. And finding 3, we did have 11 shared consensus statements. This is not unreasonable given, one, that we only had 21 respondents for this study, and there was no pattern that indicated unanimity toward a competency area, meaning that none of the competency area was there a consensus about scoring high or low as far as consensus statements across the board. And our Z-score variance demonstrates agreement between factors. The Z-scores are simply scores that are standardized across the values so they can be compared between your different factors. Interestingly, none of the statements were significant at 0.01, and only 4 were significant at 0.05. So in conclusion, what we're looking at here is we conducted a study to see how post-secondary and secondary educators evaluated a set of competency statements that we generated from 3 external sources. Those sources were the UCGIS's body of knowledge, the GISCI's competency exam preparation, as well as the Department of Labor geospatial technology competency model. And we had them evaluate those 72 competency statements, and 19 loaded onto 3 factors. What we also conclude from this, that once again, Q methodology is a valid approach for looking at perspectives, shared and otherwise, for a different set of statements. And this leads us to believe that better sources of data analysis such as this can enable us to have better understanding of what competencies are needed within the industry, and therefore help educators within the geospatial field best prepare our students for going into the geospatial workforce. At this point, I would have asked questions if I was there in person, but I had to record the video. Here's my contact information as well as a link to the Q methodology study. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodney. So I wish Rodney was here to be able to ask him some questions related to the study, since I am not going to be able to answer anything related to that. I guess Anne or Nicole, were either of you involved in that at all, or have any part to play in that study?
I helped him select the 72, and we really tried to make them. We also had a set of international opinions on what was important. So we took those 190 and whittled them down to 72. And please, there's a new Q study out there. Go to the website, the Geotech Center website, and look at it and do participate. It's interesting. We want to look at what educators think and perceive as important versus what the workforce says is important, and make sure that they are aligned. Anyway, Nicole?
I was not really part of that study, so I really can't comment on it.
He's written a long, very technical, peer-reviewed report on the outcomes, and it's interesting.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think for me as well, I'll need to dive into some of the more detailed findings to be able to pull a little bit more from that. And not to stick this on you, Anne, but the one question I had pop up, and I don't know if you have an answer for it, was as part of the study, Rodney mentioned the kind of pull factors coming from industry. And he mentioned in that presentation, like it was a very kind of small subset of industry that was looked at. Do you have any insight into what specific field or what area was looked at to see what kind of that almost pull the needs of industry are?
Well, it was interesting because I think he went through the GISP group,
okay,
GISCI, but I think he also had a lot of people from focused on surveying or surveyors. So it may be that that was also influential in what the industry thought, but his full paper will tell you more.
Okay, perfect. No, that's perfect, Anne. Thank you. And so for those curious to get the full paper or get more information, Rodney had put his contact information down, or you could just go to the Geotech Center website. I'll type Rodney's email contact information into the chat in case anybody wants to reach out to him. And Ina said you were a participant in that study, and it was hard to rank certain things as low, and there were limited high spaces to be able to rank. So interesting.
Yeah, Rodney said probably we had 72 is a lot of competencies to rank, and some people said it would have been the most studies do between 50 and 60. We hate to change it at this point because then you can't do comparisons.
Yeah.
So he's right now putting things together, and we'll see how that comes out. But with the 72, it isn't easy because you may think it's hard to do. It's not an easy thing to do. It's your perceptions. It's
For
not
sure.
fact.
Yeah, trying to get anything kind of qualitative-ish and boil it down to a quantitative project like this, and then be able to compare these factors that are also changing and fairly dynamic, over the years. So totally understand. On a similar note, internally, I'm trying to work on a project to look at some of those needs on the industry side and try to come up with a methodology to boil down those needs so we can start to kind of look at it in a more quantitative fashion. And so this is actually a really nice resource for me to look at, how others are starting to kind of break that down and look at it.
Yeah, if you look at the even the competencies that we use for the self-assessment, a lot of those we had industry fill out the self-assessment, and we can give you data of how I think several hundred people filled that out of the 190, and that gave us some real information about what industry felt was important.
Awesome. And then apologies, our last presenter, we were supposed to have Mariano here, who's going to go over mini credentialing and the university's response to emerging GIS needs of communities, which sounds like a really fascinating presentation. But it looks like he wasn't able to make it to the session to be able to present. And unfortunately, I don't have a video of the presentation to be able to share with everyone. So that's something in the follow-up we'll have to get a video, and then we can share that out later on so that people have the ability to access that and get that. So with that, are there any other questions that anyone might have? We have a little bit of extra time available, obviously, because of our third presenter wasn't able to make it. And if there are no more questions, thank you to everybody that presented. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Rodney, for the presentations. And certainly, please send them questions or feedback if you want to reach out to them. Again, thank you so much. And we did have a question come in from Stephanie. Recommendations for starting one's credentialing path. Great question.
Well, I guess it really depends if you're, keeping the documentation you get from attending things like this. In the next session, I'll talk about some other resources from the Geotech Center, but attend conferences and hands-on workshops and document that you've done it. If you're going to go for a GISP, you're going to need those kind of things. Document your work experience. Just as you go through, make sure you copy down where you've presented, what you've presented, and who you've contacted and what credentials you have and your work experience.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. And any other recommendations from other folks? I mean, I picture kind of a laundry list style CV of conferences you've presented or attended, sessions, et cetera. And that will certainly be the supporting material you'll need for that GISP, process and that application. So that's certainly a really good one. Rebecca dropped a just question, kind of inquiry to the group. If anyone's working on electoral redistricting or know anyone who is, to please reach out to her.
I put a shameless plug in there for geotech summer professional development if anybody's interested.
Perfect. No worries. Thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Yep. Yeah. Hey, Jim.
Hey, I've been looking at micro-credentials a lot in the career tech space as well, and it's a big issue in that arena.
Yeah.
And it's not just certifying educators. There's a program called GIS Bootcamp that's a Esri partner, and he's certifying people for micro-credentials around particular GIS tasks.
Okay.
And he's really looked at this same issue and concluded that most of our university programs are just missing what employers want.
Yeah.
And they're producing very generic degrees. Yeah, you can do anything, but you can do nothing when somebody says, make a fire map, do this, do that. So what I'm seeing this happen, and I'm really excited about this trend, this narrowing down to something that somebody can get a chunk of that immediately gets them employable. And I love that you're working with teachers, because I found the same issue in entrepreneurship. There aren't enough certified teachers. They don't have any work experience in it. The other piece, though, there was a pilot program with high school students in Chicago and in rural Virginia. They needed mentors. So that's the other big thing, is I think working with Esri partners and finding people doing this work so that when they have a question, they can talk to somebody in that industry. It's the combination of the MOOC alone without the mentors. And that's why I like how they've structured this, that they're actually working with teachers who've taught it. But I'm really interested in combining entrepreneurship and business analyst and a career field, because they don't have time to do a whole GIS certificate. They're already doing transportation or logistics or healthcare. But if they could find out where are their gaps, where are their services, there's a little micro credential in there, but they could also be going right to work with it. And I think that's what's so fun about this. So the other issue is there isn't a clearinghouse of these credentials yet that employers trust.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to go. But I love that the community college is providing that. And I think universities can, for now, are the trusted person in this. So the other thing is, think about, if you're thinking about federal financial aid, I learned from a local contact that 16 credits is the minimum, but you could package one of these in a 16 credit bunch. Someone could actually get, if it's part of an undergrad certificate, they could actually get financial aid to do this certification. So keep working. This is great work. Listing these competencies is really important, but also I think that broad set of competencies could be narrowed down to, I just want to know, what do I need for business analytics? What do I need for a biology job? Now, some of these you need everything. They're very broad, but there's a lot of applications. My colleague just gave a presentation this morning. We only need about 3 things. We don't need all 40 of them. So teach me how to teach those 3 things, and then I can get students using that right away. That's my take on it.
No, great input, Jim. I think, yeah, certainly I've heard this time and time again from, students coming out of traditional programs occasionally, where, that skill set that's needed to be able to take a tool and then apply it directly to a job or a position, just, the one-to-one isn't there. They understand what projections are, they understand what coordinate systems are. But when that employer says, or it's the mayor or councilman asking them, okay, what are the, demographics of this neighborhood? And I just want to see that information in an application, I can, dive into myself and just ask questions of the data. And the skills aren't there to be able to do that. And I think similar to what you just said of the, because there's the story of, building up geospatial competency for geographers in a broader, way and framework. And then there's having that more modular skill set of spatial literacy, and then applying that to, other disciplines or other, fields that people can take those skills and some tools and quickly get value out of them.
One of the things I'd like to see is if we could get together some videos of people in those occupations doing geospatial and have them say, if you're going to go into my field, whatever it is, and say, these are the 5 things you really should know in depth about. You can know broadly, but these are the things we need. And I think also career pathway videos would be great for guidance counselors. Right now, high school guidance counselors have no idea what geospatial is or career pathways. If we could give guidance counselors these, students these, and continue on.
That is a big story there. That's all.
Well, the exciting thing though is like,
Okay, please, can I say something?
go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Moses. I'm from West Africa. And we are in Africa, we are also looking forward to GIS. Actually, GIS is just pushing up in Africa. It's not there yet. We have not gotten to the peak, but we are pushing hard. Some of us wants to be the pioneer of GIS. We want to bring GIS to the limelight and for better decision making in Africa. Now, some of us use Esri software. Some of us have free license on ArcGIS Online. Some of us has gone through different stages of Esri mock for free, which is a good one to as a starting point to make Africa to take up GIS and decision making about the environment and economy and all that. So what I want to say is this: in all these the programs of Esri, are they looking at Africa? Now, Africa is a low-income economic continent. Now, most of us cannot even afford to get the Esri software. Even we have seen videos, we have participated in the mock that will get us familiarized and get us to fall in love with the software. But the finances behind it, acquiring a licensed software is out of reach to most African students. Now, if you look at students, they don't have any stipends from the government, they don't have all that. So, and how can Esri help African students in developing GIS, their interest in GIS and leveraging on ArcGIS or Esri products? Thank you.
That's a great question, Moses, and one probably we don't have enough time to dive fully into. I know, it's one small initiative I'm well aware of, but there's the African Geoportal that Esri has put some resources and time into to basically create kind of a clearinghouse or a living atlas of data and resources for the African continent. So that's certainly a resource and a wealth of information for students, for others, not in just Africa alone, but obviously across the world, to be able to dive into and explore maps, data, and the availability of data on the continent. And then, in terms of pricing and licenses, there is still the availability of student licenses and, university licensing at institutions across the world. So there's, much reduced licensing. And then for students, there's software available at the K-12 space globally as well, so that students can just get access to the tools. We just need to put in a request to get access. Thanks, Alexa, for dropping that link into the chat. And then we've got about 1 more minute left in the conversation. And thank you to everybody for contributing some questions and some dialogue here. I think this was really nice to extend the session a little bit. Any lasting comments, or Anne, did you have something to say?
Well, one of the things, Mike Gould, and I put his email address in there. He does a lot in Africa, and he's got a lot of resources from Africa. So, and there's K-12 is still open in Africa nationally. So I think it's just a matter of putting the dots together, linking them.
Yeah, great point. I find the same thing still in the US, where schools are unaware that they have licensing available to them, and it's just trying to get them to send the request in or make sure that they are, as you just said, Anne, kind of connecting the dots to let them know what they have available to them. So with that, we're basically at time. I wanted to thank everybody, as well from the audience and our presenters for providing some feedback and some commentary. Hope everybody has a great Ed Summit, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.